Let's see if charity cases belong on this stage. The famous violinist's cruel whisper cut through the silence of Symphony Hall just as the blind African-American girl raised her violin. Everyone expected her to falter. How could a blind girl possibly match the technical brilliance of Victor Laurent? But when 16-year-old Zora Williams began to play, her music transcended mere notes. Was it possible that this young girl, dismissed and humiliated for her blindness, possessed a musical gift that would silence even the most arrogant critics? What happened next left the entire audience speechless. If you've ever felt underestimated or pushed aside, this story will move you to tears. Don't miss a single moment of this incredible journey from humiliation to triumph. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now, subscribe this channel and press the bell icon now not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The sound of raindrops against the windowpane created a symphony only Zora Williams could truly appreciate. Her fingers danced lightly across the worn wooden surface of her grandmother's violin, feeling every scratch and imperfection, a history she could touch but never see. "You playing tonight, Zoe?" Marcus called from the kitchen, the smell of boxed macaroni filling their small apartment. "Just warming up," Zora replied, her unseeing eyes directed toward the ceiling. At 16, Zora had never known sight, born with congenital blindness that doctors couldn't explain or fix. What the doctors couldn't predict was how her other senses would compensate, especially her hearing. Zora lifted the violin to her shoulder, positioning it with the practiced ease of someone who had held this exact instrument thousands of times. The first notes soared through their cramped living room, pure and haunting. She didn't need sheet music, the melodies lived in her mind, perfect and complete. Marcus paused his cooking to listen. He'd been raising Zora since their parents died in a car accident 3 years ago. At 23, he worked 2 jobs to keep their modest apartment and to make sure Zora had everything she needed for school. "Grandma Jo would be proud," he said softly when she finished. Zora's fingers traced the intricate carvings on the violin's neck, her grandmother's initials embedded in the wood. Josephine Williams had been her first teacher, guiding Zora's small hands over the strings when she was just 4 years old. "Ms. Johnson thinks I should apply for that master class," Zora said, uncertainty in her voice. "The one with that famous violinist who's visiting next month." Marcus set a bowl in front of her, guiding her hand to the spoon. "Ms. Johnson believes in you." "So do I." At school the next day, Ms. Diane Johnson waited for Zora after class. Unlike most teachers who seemed uncertain how to interact with Zora, Ms. Johnson had never treated her differently, except to recognize her extraordinary talent. "Did you think about what I mentioned?" Ms. Johnson asked, her voice carrying the warm cadence that had made her the most beloved music teacher at Roosevelt High. "I don't know if I'm ready for someone like Victor Laurent," Zora admitted. "Child, you were born ready," Ms. Johnson said firmly. "Your grandmother taught you to play from the soul. That's something most trained musicians spend their whole lives trying to learn." Zora's fingers tightened around her cane. "But he's played with symphonies all over the world. And you've got music in your blood that can't be taught at any conservatory," Ms. Johnson countered. "Trust me, Zora. This could change everything for you." As Zora left the music room, the familiar sounds of the hallway guided her, lockers closing, sneakers squeaking against linoleum, the particular echo that told her she was approaching the main entrance. She navigated this world of sound with confidence, even as she felt the stares of other students. That night, she played her grandmother's favorite piece, letting the memory of Josephine's hands guiding hers flow through the melody. The music filled their small apartment, carrying with it dreams bigger than their circumstances, hopes stronger than her fears. "Okay," she whispered to herself when the final note faded. "I'll do it. For Grandma Jo." Ms. Johnson's heels clicked decisively against the polished floor of Principal Anderson's office. The sound echoed off the walls adorned with framed accomplishments and donor acknowledgments that Ms. Johnson couldn't see at the moment, focused as she was on her mission. "Victor Laurent is one of the most renowned violinists of our time," Principal Anderson said, leaning back in his leather chair. "We're incredibly fortunate that he's agreed to conduct a master class at Roosevelt. This kind of exposure for our school is precisely why Zora Williams should participate, Ms. Johnson interrupted. She's the most talented musician we have. Principal Anderson's expression tightened. Ms. Johnson, I appreciate your advocacy, but this is a high-profile event. We need to showcase students who will represent Roosevelt appropriately. You mean students whose parents donate to the school foundation, Ms. Johnson said flatly. That's unfair. What's unfair is excluding a musical prodigy because she's blind and doesn't come from money. Principal Anderson sighed, rubbing his temple. It's not that simple. Mr. Laurent has certain expectations. The students participating will be performing complex pieces with limited preparation time. They'll need to read music. Zora doesn't need to read music, Ms. Johnson countered. She can play anything after hearing it once. Her ear is perfect. That's simply not how classical training works. Maybe not in the conservatories Mr. Laurent is used to, but Zora's grandmother was teaching jazz improvisation at Juilliard before she retired. That musical legacy runs deep. Principal Anderson's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of Juilliard. Ms. Johnson noted the change and pressed her advantage. Just imagine the publicity, Mr. Anderson. Inclusive education at Roosevelt High, blind prodigy participates in master class with world-famous violinist. That's the kind of headline that attracts donors. She could see him calculating, weighing potential risks against rewards. I'll take full responsibility, Ms. Johnson added. If it doesn't work out, it won't reflect on the school. Just give her a chance. After a long moment, Principal Anderson nodded curtly. One chance. But if Mr. Laurent objects, or if she can't keep up, she'll keep up, Ms. Johnson assured him, already rising from her chair. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Later that afternoon, Zora sat perfectly still as Ms. Johnson explained what she'd arranged. The music room was empty except for the two of them, the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows and catching dust motes that danced in the air. Victor Laurent. Zora repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The Victor Laurent. The very same, Ms. Johnson confirmed. It's an amazing opportunity, Zora. But why would he want to teach me? Uncertainty crept into Zora's voice. I'm not. You stop right there, Ms. Johnson said firmly. Your grandmother didn't raise you to doubt yourself. At the mention of her grandmother, Zora's shoulders straightened slightly. Marcus will need to adjust his work schedule to get me there. I can pick you up if he can't, Ms. Johnson offered. This is too important to miss. When Marcus learned about the master class that evening, his reaction was mixed. It's an incredible opportunity, he agreed, serving Zora her dinner. But I've heard Laurent is demanding. Ms. Johnson says he's the best, Zora replied, finding her fork with practiced ease. The best musician, maybe. Not necessarily the best person. Marcus sat across from her. I don't want you getting hurt. Zora smiled in his direction. I'm stronger than I look, you know. That you are, Marcus admitted. Grandma Jo made sure of that. Later, as Zora practiced in her room, Marcus made a phone call to Ms. Johnson. Will you be there the whole time? He asked quietly. I've read about Laurent. He has a reputation for reducing students to tears. I'll be there, Ms. Johnson promised. And Zora is different from his usual students. She might surprise him more than he surprises her. As she hung up, Ms. Johnson hoped her confidence in Zora wasn't misplaced. Victor Laurent was indeed known for his brilliance, and his brutality towards students he deemed unworthy. But something told her that Zora Williams, with her extraordinary gift and quiet resilience, might be exactly what the arrogant maestro needed to encounter. The day Victor Laurent arrived at Roosevelt High, the school transformed. Maintenance staff had been working overtime for a week, polishing floors, repainting hallways, and ensuring the auditorium's acoustics were perfect. Teachers wore their finest attire, and students from the music program had been instructed on proper etiquette for addressing the maestro. Principal Anderson paced nervously at the main entrance, adjusting his tie for the third time in 5 minutes. The board members were already assembled in the reception area, along with major donors who had been specially invited to witness the arrival of classical music royalty at their humble institution. "Is everything ready in the auditorium?" he asked Ms. Johnson, who stood calmly reviewing her notes. "Everything except the students," she replied. "They're still in class until 10. And, the Williams girl? Have you prepared her?" Ms. Johnson's expression hardened slightly. "Zora is as prepared as anyone can be. She'll be joining the other students directly in the auditorium." Before Principal Anderson could respond, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. A hushed excitement rippled through the assembled crowd. Victor Laurent emerged from the vehicle with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to making an entrance. Tall and imposing, with silver-streaked dark hair and impeccable tailoring, he surveyed the school with the detached interest of an emperor visiting a distant province of his realm. "Mr. Laurent. What an honor," Principal Anderson effused, hurrying forward with hand extended. "Roosevelt High welcomes you with the greatest." "The acoustics in your auditorium," Laurent interrupted, his accent precisely balanced between French and transatlantic refinement. "Has anything been done about them since our last correspondence?" Principal Anderson faltered. Yes, of course. We've implemented all the adjustments your team suggested." Laurent nodded curtly, already moving past him toward the entrance. The entourage of school officials scrambled to follow, leaving Ms. Johnson bringing up the rear, her expression thoughtful. In the front row of the auditorium, Eliza Pierce sat with perfect posture, her designer outfit setting her apart from the other students. As the daughter of the school's largest benefactor, she had been guaranteed a spot in the master class, a fact she had mentioned to anyone who would listen for weeks. "He's even more distinguished in person," she whispered to the girl beside her as Laurent strode down the center aisle, his footsteps echoing in the hushed space. "My mother attended his performance at Carnegie Hall last spring. She said he received a standing ovation that lasted nearly 10 minutes. The maestro took his position on stage, surveying the gathered students with cool assessment. Principal Anderson stepped forward to make formal introductions, but Laurent raised a hand to silence him. "I prefer to learn about my students through their music, not through platitudes," he said. His gaze swept the assembled young musicians. "I understand I will be working with 8 students over the next 3 weeks. I expect discipline, dedication, and a level of preparation that many of you have likely never attempted before." His eyes narrowed slightly as he continued, "I was told this school has a respectable music program. I will determine that for myself. Tomorrow, each of you will perform a piece of my selection with minimal preparation time. This will establish our baseline." Eliza straightened even further in her seat, a confident smile playing on her lips. After the formal introduction, Principal Anderson hosted a small reception in the teacher's lounge, transformed for the occasion with borrowed artwork and catered refreshments. Laurent moved through the space with practiced charm, engaging with board members and donors while subtly evaluating the caliber of the school's facilities. Ms. Johnson approached him as he stood momentarily alone, examining a student artwork display. "Mr. Laurent, I'm Diane Johnson, head of the music department. I'll be assisting with the master class." He turned, offering a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, yes. Your principal mentioned you. Former symphony musician, weren't you?" Before turning to education. The slight pause communicated volumes about his view of teaching as a career. "Yes, Chicago Symphony for 12 years, she replied evenly. "I find developing young talent incredibly rewarding." "Speaking of your students," Laurent said, sipping from a water glass, "I received the final roster this morning. There seems to be some mistake." "Oh. A student named Zora Williams. I understand she's blind." His tone made the word sound like an insurmountable deficiency. "She is. She's also extraordinarily talented." Laurent's expression remained polite but skeptical. "I'm sure she's quite accomplished, considering her situation. However, my masterclass isn't designed as a charitable endeavor. The music we'll be working with requires technical precision and years of formal training." "Zora has both," Ms. Johnson replied, keeping her voice level despite her rising indignation. Without the ability to read music? I find that hard to believe. She plays by ear. Perfectly. Lauren's smile became indulgent. Ms. Johnson, playing simple melodies by ear and mastering classical repertoire are entirely different matters. Perhaps there's another student who might benefit more from this opportunity. Principal Anderson has approved Zora's participation, Ms. Johnson stated firmly. I believe you'll find her capabilities surprising. Lauren's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Very well. I suppose we'll discover tomorrow just how surprising your student is. Across the room, Eliza Pierce had been watching the exchange with keen interest. As Ms. Johnson walked away, she approached the maestro with practiced poise. Mr. Laurent, I'm Eliza Pierce. It's such an honor to meet you. My mother attended your performance at Carnegie Hall. Did she? How lovely. His tone warmed as he recognized the name Pierce, associated with the largest donation to the school's new performing arts wing. And you'll be participating in the master class? Yes, sir. I've been studying violin for 11 years. Excellent. And who is your current instructor? As Eliza detailed her private lessons with a former Boston Symphony player, Laurent nodded approvingly. This was the type of student he expected, privileged, well-trained, and connected. Later, as the reception wound down, Principal Anderson approached Laurent with an anxious smile. I trust everything is satisfactory so far. Mostly, Laurent replied. Though I do have concerns about one of your selected students. This blind girl, yes. Zora Williams. Principal Anderson lowered his voice. A special case. Her inclusion was strongly advocated for by Ms. Johnson. I understand your reservations, but perhaps as a gesture of goodwill toward our community outreach efforts. Laurent's expression remained impassive, but a flash of irritation crossed his eyes. I see. Well, we shall proceed as planned for now. As he departed for his hotel that evening, Laurent reviewed the student files provided by the school. He paused at Zora's sparse information, noting the absence of formal accolades or competition placements. With a dismissive sigh, he set the file aside. Tomorrow would be illuminating, and likely confirm what he already suspected about this misguided attempt at inclusion. The morning of the first master class dawned with a nervous energy that permeated Roosevelt High. Students whispered in hallways about Victor Laurent's reputation, embellishing stories of his brutal critiques and impossible standards. By the time Zora arrived, guided by Marcus to the auditorium's side entrance, the tension was palpable even to her. You sure about this? Marcus asked quietly, pausing before the door. It's not too late to change your mind. Zora adjusted her grip on her violin case. I'm sure. Grandma Jo always said hiding your light doesn't serve anyone. Marcus squeezed her shoulder. I'll pick you up at 3. Text me if you need anything before then. Inside, Ms. Johnson was waiting. She guided Zora to the row where the master class participants sat, carefully describing the layout of the space. There's a chair on the end for you, she explained. Laurent will be working from the stage, and students will go up one by one when called. Zora nodded, settling into her seat. She could sense the presence of other students nearby, their whispers falling silent as she arranged her cane beside her chair. The familiar weight of her grandmother's violin across her lap provided comfort in the unfamiliar surroundings. That's Zora Williams, she heard someone whisper. The blind one. How is she supposed to keep up? Another voice responded. Ms. Johnson pulled strings. My mother says it's just for diversity points. Zora kept her expression neutral, focusing instead on the sounds of the auditorium, the subtle creaking of the stage, the rustle of papers, the particular acoustics of this space she would need to navigate. The room fell silent as footsteps approached from the side of the stage. Even without seeing him, Zora could sense Victor Laurent's presence, the confident stride, the expectant hush that followed him. Good morning, he began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space. Today, we establish our foundation. I need to understand what I'm working with, your strengths, your weaknesses, your potential. He explained the process. Each student would be given sheet music they hadn't seen before, with 15 minutes to review before performing. The pieces were selected to challenge technical skills and interpretive abilities. "Miss Pierce, we'll begin with you," Laurent announced. Eliza moved gracefully to the stage, accepting the music with a confident smile. Zora listened as she worked through her preparation, noting the challenging runs and complex fingering of the piece Laurent had selected. When Eliza performed, her technical precision was evident. Each note was exactly where it should be, the tempo maintained with metronomic accuracy. When she finished, Laurent offered measured praise, with specific critiques about emotional depth. For more students followed, each receiving increasingly specific criticism. Laurent's expertise was undeniable, even as his manner grew more cutting with each performance. "Mr. Williams," Laurent finally called, consulting his list with a slight frown. "It's Miss Williams," Ms. Johnson corrected from the side of the room. "And she's—" "Ah yes, our special participant," Laurent interrupted, his tone carrying a hint of impatience. "Miss Williams, please come to the stage." Zora stood, unfolding her cane. She moved with practiced confidence, though her heart hammered in her chest. When she reached the stage steps, Ms. Johnson appeared at her side, guiding her up. "Miss Williams, I understand you have a unique situation," Laurent said once she stood center stage. "How do you propose to handle the sight-reading portion of today's exercise?" Before Zora could answer, she felt a twinge in her lower back, a familiar pain that had plagued her since last semester when another teacher had struck her with a ruler for accidentally bumping into a desk in her classroom. The pain flared whenever she sat too long. "I can play what I hear," Zora replied. "If someone could perform the piece once, I can replicate it. And I'll need to stand, if that's all right. I have back pain from—" "Back pain? How convenient," Laurent cut in, his skepticism evident. "And you expect me to perform your piece for you first?" Murmurs rippled through the auditorium. Zora felt heat rising in her cheeks but kept her chin raised. "It's how I learn best, sir. The world of classical music doesn't accommodate how we learn best," Laurent replied coldly. "It demands adherence to centuries of established practice and discipline." Ms. Johnson stepped forward. "Mr. Laurent, if I may." "You may not, Ms. Johnson. This is my master class." Laurent's voice hardened. "Miss Williams, I admire your ambition, but this exercise requires reading music. Perhaps you should observe today and participate in other activities better suited to your abilities." Zora stood perfectly still, her fingers tight around her violin. "Sir, I'd like to try." Laurent sighed audibly. "Very well. Mr. Chen, please lend Miss Williams your sheet music, not that she'll use it, and we'll proceed with the charade." The boy sitting nearest to the stage reluctantly approached with his music sheets. "Take a seat, Miss Williams," Laurent instructed. "I'd prefer to stand, sir. My back." "Everyone else manages to sit. The chair is directly behind you." Zora hesitated, the memory of pain making her reluctant. But feeling the weight of stairs and not wanting to appear difficult, she carefully sat, setting her cane aside and positioning her violin. She heard Eliza snicker from the front row, a whispered, special treatment reaching her sensitive ears. The auditorium had fallen deadly silent, the kind of silence that weighs like a physical presence. Zora sat rigidly in a chair, her back already protesting, but her face betrayed nothing as she positioned her violin under her chin. "Since Miss Williams requires accommodations," Laurent began, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain, "perhaps we should select something more suitable for her level." The implication was clear, he was choosing something simpler, more elementary than what he'd given the other students. Zora's fingers tightened imperceptibly on her bow. "That won't be necessary," she said quietly but firmly. Laurent's footsteps approached, stopping directly in front of her. "I beg your pardon." "I can play whatever piece you've selected for the others," Zora clarified, her unseeing eyes directed toward his voice. A soft murmur rippled through the watching students. Eliza's distinctive laugh cut through the whispers. Is that so? Lauren's voice had taken on an almost amused quality. Very well. Mr. Chen was to play Bach's Chaconne from Partita No. 2. Are you familiar with it? It was a notoriously difficult piece, one that even seasoned violinists approached with caution. Zora had heard her grandmother play portions of it years ago, but had never attempted it herself. I know of it, she answered honestly. Splendid. The word was like ice. Then allow me to demonstrate a passage. Listen carefully, this will be your only chance. Laurent took his own violin, a Stradivarius worth more than most houses, and began to play. The music that filled the auditorium was technically flawless, each note articulated with precision and authority. He played for approximately 2 minutes, covering one of the most challenging sections of the Chaconne, then stopped abruptly. Now you, he said simply, stepping back. Zora took a deep breath, trying to ignore the growing pain in her back. She raised her bow, then hesitated. Sir, may I please stand? My back. Miss Williams, in a professional setting, one doesn't make excuses, Laurent cut in sharply. Either you can perform under the conditions provided, or you cannot. Which is it? The pain was becoming more intense, radiating down her spine from where the teacher had struck her months ago. But the humiliation of walking off stage would be worse. Zora straightened as much as she could and began to play. Her first notes were tentative, her body fighting against the discomfort. She missed a fingering, then another. The music, which lived so clearly in her mind, was being betrayed by her physical discomfort. Stop, stop, Laurent interrupted after 30 seconds. This is precisely what I feared. You've clearly memorized some basic violin repertoire, but this level of music is beyond your capabilities. I can do better, Zora said, her voice strained. If I could just stand. The issue isn't your position, Miss Williams. Lauren's voice had taken on the patient tone one might use with a small child. The issue is that you're attempting something beyond your training and ability. There's no shame in that, we all have our limitations. From the front row, Eliza's voice carried clearly, some more than others. Several students laughed quietly. Ms. Johnson started forward from her position at the side of the room, her face tight with anger, but Principal Anderson placed a restraining hand on her arm, shaking his head slightly. Laurent turned to the class. This is an important lesson for all of you. Ambition must be tempered by honest self-assessment. False confidence helps no one. Zora sat perfectly still, her face burning with shame and anger. The pain in her back was now secondary to the humiliation washing over her. I believe we've taken enough time with this experiment, Laurent continued. Miss Williams, you're welcome to observe the remainder of today's session, but I think we've established that active participation would be unproductive for everyone involved. Before Zora could respond, the auditorium door banged open. Heavy footsteps strode down the aisle. Marcus, who had decided to stay and watch from the back, was approaching the stage. Zoe, we're leaving, he called, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. Young man, we're in the middle of a class, Principal Anderson protested. A class? Marcus reached the stage and gently took Zora's arm. Looks more like public humiliation to me. Laurent drew himself up. I don't know who you are, but I'm her brother, and we're done here. Marcus helped Zora to her feet, retrieving her cane and handing it to her. You okay? He asked quietly. Zora nodded, her face expressionless as she carefully placed her violin in its case. Ms. Johnson, Marcus called, is there somewhere else Zora can practice during this time slot? Somewhere without toxic people. Ms. Johnson stepped forward, ignoring Principal Anderson's warning look. The choir room is available. I'll make arrangements. As Marcus guided Zora toward the exit, Laurent called after them, talent requires discipline and technique, Miss Williams. Sentiment and accommodation won't change that reality. The heavy auditorium door closed behind them with a decisive thud. The Williams apartment was quiet that evening, save for the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. Zora sat on the edge of her bed, her violin case open beside her, the instrument untouched. Her fingers traced the worn edges of the case, finding comfort in the familiar texture. Marcus moved around the kitchen, the sounds of dinner preparation punctuating the silence, the snap of the burner igniting, the hollow thunk of a pot being set down, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. He hadn't pressed her to talk about what happened, knowing his sister would speak when ready. Zora's mind replayed the humiliation over and over. Laurent's dismissive tone, Eliza's cutting laughter, the whispers that followed her exit. But even stronger than these painful memories was the knowledge that she had failed to play a piece she knew she could master, if only her body hadn't betrayed her. "Grandma Joe," she whispered to the empty room, "I wish you were here." The memory came unbidden, sitting beside her grandmother on their old sofa, tiny fingers guided over violin strings, the smell of lavender and rosin hanging in the air. "Music isn't in the eyes, child," Josephine Williams had told her. "It's in the heart and in the ears. You listen differently than other people. That's your gift, not your burden." When Zora was 7, a visiting music teacher had declared it impossible for a blind child to master violin at a serious level. Grandmother Josephine, who had toured with Duke Ellington in her youth before studying classical violin at Juilliard, had simply smiled and said, "Watch her." "You played for Grandma that day," Marcus said from the doorway, startling Zora from her memories. "Beethoven's Violin Concerto in D." The teacher nearly fell over. Zora smiled faintly. "You remember that? Hard to forget." Marcus sat beside her on the bed. "You were this tiny thing with 2 missing front teeth and the biggest smile when you finished. Grandma was so proud she cried." Zora leaned against her brother's shoulder. "I let her down today." "No," Marcus said firmly. "That arrogant jackass set you up to fail. There's a difference." "But I should have been able to play it. I had it in my head, Marcus. I could hear every note Laurent played. But my back, the back that still hurts because of that teacher who hit you." Marcus's voice tightened. "The one the school did nothing about?" Zora nodded. "It gets worse when I sit too long." Marcus sighed heavily. "I should have pulled you out of that school months ago. And sent me where? Roosevelt has the best music program in the district. A lot of good it's doing you when people like Laurent." A knock at the front door interrupted them. Marcus frowned, not expecting visitors. "It's probably Ms. Johnson," Zora said. "She texted that she might come by." Marcus went to answer the door, and Zora heard the murmur of voices before footsteps approached her room. "Hey, Zora," Ms. Johnson's warm voice entered the room before she did. "I brought something for you." Zora turned toward her teacher's voice. "You didn't have to come all this way." "Yes, I did." The bed dipped slightly as Ms. Johnson sat beside her. "First, to tell you I'm sorry about today. What happened was unacceptable. It wasn't your fault. I pushed for you to be included without fully understanding what Laurent's approach would be." Ms. Johnson's voice carried genuine regret. "That's on me." What happened after we left?" Zora asked, not entirely sure she wanted to know. Laurent continued as if nothing had happened. "Eliza performed brilliantly, technically speaking. The others did their best." Ms. Johnson paused. "Principal Anderson pulled me aside afterward to suggest you be officially withdrawn from the master class." Zora's heart sank, though she wasn't surprised. "I told him absolutely not," Ms. Johnson continued, "unless that was your decision." "My decision?" Zora's head lifted in surprise. "This is your education, Zora. Your music. No one gets to take that from you, not Laurent, not the principal, not anyone." From the doorway, Marcus spoke, "After what happened today, you can't seriously expect her to go back." "I expect nothing," Ms. Johnson replied. "I support whatever Zora decides. But I brought something that might help." There was a rustle of paper. "This is a recording of Laurent's performance of the complete Bach Partita No. 2, including the chaconne he tried to use against you today." Zora's fingers found the CD case Ms. Johnson placed in her hands. Laurent has a very distinct interpretive style, Ms. Johnson continued. If you decide to return, familiarizing yourself with his approach might be strategically advantageous. You want me to learn his style? Zora asked, turning the case in her hands. I want you to understand your opponent, Ms. Johnson corrected. Music is art, but what happened today wasn't about art. It was about power. Laurent used his position and your physical discomfort to undermine you. Marcus made a sound of agreement from the doorway. Whether you return or not is entirely up to you, Ms. Johnson said, standing. But know this, great musicians throughout history have faced people who told them they couldn't or shouldn't play. The ones we remember are those who played anyway. After Ms. Johnson left, Zora sat silently holding the CD. Marcus watched her from the doorway, concern etched on his face. What are you thinking, Zoe? Zora's fingers traced the raised lettering on the CD case. I'm thinking about what Grandma Jo would do. Marcus laughed softly. She'd march right back in there and play so beautifully that Laurent would have to eat his violin bow. She would, wouldn't she? For the first time that day, Zora smiled genuinely. She reached for her violin, removing it carefully from its case. The instrument felt right in her hands, an extension of herself, a voice when words failed. I'm not done yet, she said quietly, raising the violin to her shoulder. Not even close. The first notes of Bach's chaconne filled their small apartment, hesitant at first, then growing steadier, stronger. Zora played standing, her back free from pain, her mind focused only on the music flowing through her. In the shadows of their modest home, she began to find her strength again. The waiting room of Dr. Chen's office was filled with the gentle sounds of a water feature and ambient music carefully chosen for its calming properties. Zora sat with her hands folded in her lap, her violin case resting against her legs. Marcus had dropped her off on his way to work, insisting that today's appointment was too important to reschedule. Zora. Dr. Rebecca Chen's voice carried the warm precision that had made her one of the most sought-after music therapists in the city. Come on in. Zora stood, gathering her cane and violin. She navigated the familiar path to Dr. Chen's office, where the scent of jasmine tea greeted her. I've been thinking about you, Dr. Chen said once they were settled. Your brother called me about what happened at the master class. Zora's fingers tightened around her cane. It wasn't my best moment. From what I heard, it wasn't Victor Lawrence either. Dr. Chen's voice carried a note of disapproval. How are you feeling about it now? Angry, Zora admitted after a pause. But also, determined. Determined to do what? To prove him wrong. To prove I belong in that master class. Zora took a deep breath. But I keep hearing his voice in my head, telling me I don't have the technique or discipline. Dr. Chen was silent for a moment. When she spoke, her tone was thoughtful. You know, I once had the opportunity to work with Laurent. This was years ago, when he was recording with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. They hired me as a consultant for a project involving music cognition. Zora leaned forward slightly. What was he like? Brilliant. Exacting. And utterly conventional in his approach to music. Dr. Chen set down her teacup with a gentle clink. He believes there is one correct way to interpret Bach, one proper technique for Vivaldi. It's why his playing, while technically flawless, often lacks the spark of true innovation. Ms. Johnson said something similar, Zora murmured. She gave me a recording of his Bach interpretation. And what did you hear? Perfection, Zora admitted. Every note exactly where it should be. But, Dr. Chen prompted gently. But I couldn't feel his heart in it. When Grandma Jo played Bach, you could hear her soul in every note, even when her arthritis made her fingers slip sometimes. Dr. Chen made a sound of agreement. That's the difference between playing music and making music. Laurent plays. Your grandmother made. Zora's hands found her violin case, tracing the worn clasps. I want to make music like she did. Then perhaps that's your answer about the master class, Dr. Chen suggested. Not to prove Laurent wrong, but to honor how your grandmother taught you to play. But what if I freeze up again? What if my back? Let's talk about that. Dr. Chen's chair creaked as she shifted. Your back pain is partially physical, from the injury, but it's also connected to the trauma of what happened. When you're anxious or feel threatened, the muscles tense, intensifying the pain. So what do I do? We work on both aspects. For the physical pain, I want you to try some specific stretches before playing. Dr. Chen moved around the desk. May I show you? For the next 20 minutes, Dr. Chen guided Zora through gentle stretches designed to release tension in her lower back. They talked through breathing techniques to use when anxiety threatened to overshadow her playing. And most importantly, Dr. Chen said as they finished, I want you to remember why you play. Not for Laurent's approval or even to prove something to yourself. You play because music speaks through you in a way words cannot. Zora nodded, feeling a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced since before the humiliation in the auditorium. Can I play something for you? She asked suddenly. Something I've been working on. I'd be honored. Zora opened her violin case and stood, positioning herself with the practiced ease of someone who had held this posture thousands of times. She began to play, not Bach or any classical piece, but something entirely her own. The melody carried echoes of her grandmother's favorite spirituals, interwoven with classical structures and jazz improvisations. When the final note faded, Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment. Zora, she finally said, her voice thick with emotion, that was extraordinary. Is it your composition? Zora nodded. It's still unfinished. I call it Echoes of Light, the world as I hear it, not as others see it. It's beautiful. Dr. Chen's voice had taken on the professional assessment tone Zora recognized. And technically complex. The way you've blended classical structure with spiritual and jazz elements, Laurent would probably call it impure, but it's genuinely innovative. Do you think? Zora hesitated. Do you think I should play it? At the master class? I think Victor Laurent needs to hear it, Dr. Chen answered firmly. Whether he's ready to understand it is another question entirely. But that's not your responsibility. As Zora packed up her violin, a sense of resolve settled over her. The path forward was clear. I'm going back, she said simply. I thought you might. Dr. Chen's smile was audible in her voice. And Zora? Play standing up. Doctor's orders. Later that evening, Zora sat cross-legged on her bed, Laurent's recording of Bach playing softly from her stereo. Marcus leaned against the doorframe. You sure about this? He asked. Zora nodded, her face serene in the dim light. I'm sure. Then I'm with you. Marcus's voice carried absolute support. All the way. In the darkness of her room, Zora smiled. The maestro's perfect Bach interpretation filled the space around her, technically flawless and emotionally sterile. Tomorrow, she would return to his master class. Not as a victim seeking redemption, but as a musician with her own voice to share. The choir room buzzed with nervous energy as the master class students prepared for their third session with Victor Laurent. After Zora's dramatic exit 2 days earlier, rumors had swirled throughout Roosevelt High. Some claimed she'd been permanently banned from music department activities, others insisted her brother had threatened to sue the school. The truth, that Zora had simply taken a day to regroup, was far less interesting than the fabrications. When Zora walked through the door, led by Ms. Johnson, the room fell into stunned silence. Good morning, Ms. Johnson announced with pointed cheerfulness. Mr. Laurent will be joining us momentarily. Please continue your warm-ups. Zora moved confidently to an empty space near the wall, where she could stand comfortably without obstruction. She began her own warm-up routine, running through scales with methodical precision. She could feel the stares of the other students but kept her focus on the music. Eliza Pierce's voice carried clearly across the room. I'm surprised she's back. After that disaster, I would have transferred schools. Some people can't take a hint, another student replied. Ms. Johnson cleared her throat loudly. Eliza, since you have energy for commentary, perhaps you'd like to demonstrate the Paganini section Mr. Laurent assigned yesterday? Before Eliza could respond, the door opened, and the distinctive sound of Laurent's measured footsteps entered the room. The students scrambled to attention, conversations instantly halted. "Good morning," Laurent began in his crisp accent. His footsteps paused briefly. Zora sensed he had noticed her presence, before continuing to the front of the room. "Today we move from technical proficiency to interpretive understanding. The difference between playing notes and making music." Zora's head lifted slightly at the echo of Dr. Chen's words. "We'll begin with the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto. Miss Pierce, you'll start." Eliza moved to the front, her confidence evident in her brisk steps. Her performance was technically impressive, every note in place, every dynamic marking observed. When she finished, Laurent offered specific critiques about her bow pressure during the more emotional passages. "Technically proficient," he concluded, "but I want to feel more heart in the adagio." "Next, Mr. Anderson." One by one, the students performed. Laurent was exacting but less openly dismissive than in the first session. He focused on interpretation, pushing each student to move beyond mere technical execution. Zora listened intently, absorbing not just the music but Laurent's responses. She noted how he valued precision but grew most animated when discussing the emotional intentions behind specific passages. Despite his cold demeanor, he clearly cared deeply about the music itself. Throughout the morning, Laurent did not call on Zora. She stood quietly against the wall, violin ready, but no invitation came. As the session neared its end, Ms. Johnson caught Laurent's eye with a pointed look. "Ah yes," he said, as if just remembering. "Miss Williams. Are you prepared to participate today?" "Yes, sir," Zora replied steadily. "And I assume you still require special accommodations?" "I need to stand while playing due to a back injury," Zora clarified, her voice calm. "Otherwise, I'm prepared to participate fully." Laurent made a noncommittal sound. "Very well. We've been working with Tchaikovsky today. Are you familiar with his violin concerto?" "Yes, sir." "The first movement exposition, then. Begin at measure 28 after the orchestral introduction." Zora positioned her violin, took a deep breath, and began to play. She had studied this piece with her grandmother years ago and had listened to multiple recordings since. The music flowed from her with both technical precision and emotional depth, her interpretation informed by her grandmother's guidance about Tchaikovsky's intentions. When she finished the section, the room was silent. Zora stood perfectly still, waiting. "Your technique is better than I expected," Laurent finally said, his tone careful. "Though there were intonation issues in the second passage and your bow control in the spiccato sections lacks refinement." He paused, and Zora could sense him studying her. "However, your interpretation shows genuine understanding of Tchaikovsky's emotional architecture. Who taught you this piece?" "My grandmother," Zora replied. "Josephine Williams." "Williams," Laurent repeated slowly. "Not the Josephine Williams who performed with the Harlem Symphony in the 1960s. Zora nodded, surprised he knew of her grandmother's career. "I see." Something in Laurent's voice had shifted slightly. "That contextualizes your approach. Your grandmother was known for her unconventional interpretations. She believed music should speak to the soul, not just satisfy academic expectations," Zora said quietly. A murmur ran through the watching students. Laurent cleared his throat. "Well, Miss Williams, while your grandmother's philosophy has its place in certain venues, this master class focuses on classical technique and tradition. You may continue to participate, but I expect you to adapt to the standards I'm establishing." "Yes, sir," Zora answered simply. As the session concluded, Zora sensed Laurent watching her as she carefully packed away her violin. She had passed some kind of test today, not with flying colors, but she had earned the right to remain. Eliza approached as the students were leaving. "Don't get too comfortable," she said in a low voice. "Laurent's just being nice because he feels sorry for you. Everyone knows you don't belong here. Eliza, Ms. Johnson's voice cut in sharply from nearby. A word about your Tchaikovsky interpretation, please. As Eliza moved away, Marcus appeared at Zora's side. How'd it go? He asked quietly. I played, Zora said simply. He listened. It's a start. Outside in the hallway, Laurent stopped Ms. Johnson. Your student is better than I initially assessed, he admitted reluctantly. Her technique needs refinement, but her musical intuition is noteworthy. High praise from you, Ms. Johnson observed dryly. Not praise. An observation. Laurent straightened his jacket. Though I remain skeptical about her ability to progress without proper visual instruction. Some aspects of violin technique simply cannot be taught by ear alone. Perhaps, Ms. Johnson replied, but Zora has spent her life learning what others insist can't be taught. I wouldn't underestimate her again if I were you. Laurent made no reply, but as he walked away, his expression was thoughtful rather than dismissive, a subtle but significant shift from their first encounter. A week into the master class, Roosevelt High buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread that an important visitor would be attending that day's session. Principal Anderson had the maintenance staff working overtime to ensure the auditorium was spotless, and even the usually unflappable Ms. Johnson seemed tense as she arranged chairs on the stage. What's happening? Zora asked as Marcus walked her through the school's main entrance. No idea, he replied. But there are fancy cars in the parking lot, and the security guard asked for my ID for the first time ever. In the auditorium, Zora could sense the unusual energy, more people than normal, hushed important-sounding conversations, the subtle scent of expensive perfume and cologne. She took her now customary position at the side of the stage, where she could stand comfortably during the sessions. Zora, Ms. Johnson approached, her voice low. Director Collins from the Symphony Hall is here today. He's a major figure in the classical music community and a personal friend of Laurent's. Why? Zora asked, her heart beating faster. Officially, to observe the master class. Unofficially. Ms. Johnson hesitated. Laurent mentioned something about a special performance opportunity. I don't know details. Before Zora could ask more, Laurent's distinctive footsteps entered the auditorium, accompanied by another set, heavier, with a slight drag on the right foot. Students, Laurent's voice carried across the space. Today we have the honor of a distinguished guest. Alexander Collins, director of the Metropolitan Symphony Hall, has graciously agreed to observe our work this morning. A cultured voice with a slight British accent followed. It's my pleasure to witness Victor's educational contributions. Please proceed as normal. The session began with Eliza, who performed with heightened precision and emotional expression, clearly aware of the important audience. Each student followed, giving their best performances of the 2 weeks so far. Laurent's criticisms were more measured than usual, though no less specific in their technical focus. Throughout the morning, Zora listened intently, not just to the music but to the subtle interactions between Laurent and Collins. There were murmured exchanges she couldn't quite catch, the occasional appreciative sound from the director during particularly strong performances. When the formal session concluded, Laurent addressed the group. Thank you all for your focused work today. Director Collins has a brief announcement before we dismiss. Collins cleared his throat. As some of you may know, the Symphony Hall hosts an annual Emerging Artists Showcase. This year, we've invited Maestro Laurent to headline the event with a special performance of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Excited whispers rippled through the students. At Victor's suggestion, Collins continued, we're considering featuring select students from this master class as an opening performance. This would be a prestigious opportunity to perform in a professional venue before a significant audience. The whispers turned to barely contained exclamations of excitement. To be clear, Laurent interjected, this would be a serious commitment requiring additional rehearsals and absolute professionalism. Only those demonstrating exceptional promise would be considered. How many students will be selected? Someone asked. 2, perhaps 3 at most, Collins answered. We'll hold auditions next week. Those interested should prepare a piece demonstrating both technical proficiency and interpretive maturity. Maestro Laurent and I will make the final selections. As the students gathered their instruments, buzzing with excitement, Zora remained still, processing this unexpected development. A chance to perform at Symphony Hall was beyond anything she'd imagined when joining the master class. "You'll audition, of course," Ms. Johnson said, approaching her. Zora hesitated. "Do you think I have a chance? After everything with Laurent?" "Your playing has impressed him more than he's willing to admit," Ms. Johnson replied. "And more importantly, you have something the others don't, a unique voice." Across the room, Laurent and Collins were engaged in quiet conversation. Zora couldn't hear their words, but the tone suggested disagreement. "I don't know," Collins was saying, his voice suddenly rising enough for Zora to catch. "The primary donors expect a certain level of traditional excellence. Which is precisely why diversifying the program would be valuable," Laurent responded, surprising Zora with his advocacy. "The blind student, for instance." "Victor, be reasonable," Collins interrupted. "Our audience comes with specific expectations. A student with her challenges might be more appropriate for one of our community outreach programs." Zora's hands tightened around her violin case. The familiar sting of dismissal washed over her, made worse by hearing it from someone who hadn't even heard her play. Laurent's response was too quiet to catch, but his tone carried unexpected firmness. The conversation concluded with Collins saying, "Fine, she can audition. But the final decision must prioritize the program's integrity." As the men approached the exit, they passed close to where Zora stood. Laurent paused briefly. "Miss Williams," he said formally. "I expect you'll be preparing for the audition." Zora lifted her chin slightly. "Yes, sir." "Choose your piece carefully," he advised, his voice neutral but not unkind. Director Collins appreciates technical virtuosity, but responds most strongly to emotional authenticity. "Good day." After he departed, Ms. Johnson touched Zora's arm gently. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," Zora replied slowly, "that I need to play something they've never heard before. Something they can't compare to anyone else's interpretation." "Your original composition?" Ms. Johnson asked. "It's certainly unique, but incredibly risky for this kind of audition." Zora shook her head. "Not just my composition. Something that honors my grandmother's legacy while showing I can master classical tradition too." "A fusion piece?" Ms. Johnson sounded intrigued. "That could be either brilliant or disastrous with Collins." "And with Laurent?" Ms. Johnson was quiet for a moment. "He's more complex than I initially thought. The way he advocated for your inclusion in the audition. I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," Zora admitted. "But it doesn't change what I need to do." As they left the auditorium, Eliza's voice carried from where she stood with a group of students. "Symphony Hall. Can you imagine? My mother says Director Collins is personal friends with half the symphony conductors in Europe. This could change everything." "I heard they're only taking 2 students," another voice replied. "Please," Eliza laughed. "Laurent practically guaranteed me a spot already. It's just a question of who gets the second position." Zora continued walking, her face composed despite the knot forming in her stomach. The stakes had just gotten considerably higher. Symphony Hall wasn't just a performance venue, it was a gateway to professional opportunities, connections, and recognition that could shape a young musician's entire career. And Alexander Collins had already decided, without hearing a single note, that Zora Williams didn't belong on that stage. The day of the Symphony Hall auditions arrived with a tension that permeated Roosevelt High. Selected students had been excused from morning classes, and the auditorium had been reserved exclusively for Laurent and Director Collins. The usual chairs had been rearranged to create a more formal performance space, with 2 seats positioned prominently in the center for the evaluators. Zora arrived early, guided by Marcus, who had taken the morning off work to support her. Ms. Johnson met them at the side entrance, her voice carrying carefully controlled enthusiasm. They're seeing students in alphabetical order, she explained. You'll be last, Zora. That gives you time to warm up in the practice room I've reserved. How many students are auditioning? Marcus asked. 8, including Zora. Ms. Johnson lowered her voice. The competition is fierce. Laurent has been working individually with several students, including Eliza Pierce. Has he worked with Zora? Marcus's tone carried a protective edge. No, Zora answered before Ms. Johnson could. But that's okay. I've been preparing my own way. In the small practice room, Zora warmed up methodically. Her fingers moved across the strings with practiced precision, her mind focused on the complex piece she had prepared. It was a bold choice, one that might alienate Director Collins entirely, but it felt right in a way that performing standard repertoire never could. Nervous? Marcus asked, breaking the silence. Zora paused, bow hovering above the strings. Not about playing. About being heard. What do you mean? Some people decide what they're going to hear before you play a single note, Zora explained. Director Collins has already decided I don't belong on his stage. Marcus made a sound of frustration. Then why even audition? This whole thing feels rigged. Because sometimes, Zora said, raising her violin again, the only way to change people's minds is to make it impossible for them to ignore what's right in front of them. An hour later, Ms. Johnson came to escort Zora to the auditorium. The sound of applause filtered through the closed doors, another student finishing their performance. That's Eliza, Ms. Johnson whispered. She played Sarasate's Zigeunerweisen. Did she play it well? Zora asked. Flawlessly, Ms. Johnson admitted. But what? There was something calculated about it. Perfect but safe. The doors opened, and Eliza emerged, her confidence evident in her brisk stride. She paused when she saw Zora. Oh, you're actually going through with this? Her voice carried false sympathy. How brave. Zora said nothing, her face composed. Collins already mentioned to my mother that he's looking forward to having me perform, Eliza continued. But don't worry, I'm sure they'll let you play something simple at one of the children's community concerts. Miss Pierce, Ms. Johnson's voice cut in sharply. I believe your teacher is waiting for you. With a last dismissive glance, Eliza walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Inside the auditorium, Laurent and Collins sat in conversation, their voices too low for Zora to catch. They fell silent as Ms. Johnson guided her to the performance area. Miss Williams, Laurent acknowledged. Are you prepared? Yes, sir. Zora positioned herself, her posture reflecting years of discipline. What will you be playing for us? Director Collins asked, his tone professionally polite but carrying an undercurrent of skepticism. I'll be performing an original adaptation of Bach's Chaconne from Partita No. 2, Zora replied. With elements inspired by my grandmother's musical traditions. Collins made a sound of surprise. An adaptation of Bach? Director Collins, Laurent interjected smoothly, Miss Williams comes from a unique musical lineage. Her grandmother was Josephine Williams, who, I'm familiar with the name, Collins interrupted. Though I wasn't aware her granddaughter was, continuing the family tradition. The slight pause spoke volumes. Zora felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the feeling of being judged before playing a single note. Miss Williams, Laurent said, his voice neutral, you may begin when ready. Zora took a deep breath, centering herself. She thought of her grandmother, of the hours they'd spent together exploring the boundaries between classical structure and spiritual expression. She thought of Dr. Chen's advice to play from her heart, not for anyone's approval. The first notes of Bach's Chaconne emerged, precise, traditional, showcasing her technical understanding of the piece. But gradually, Zora began to transform it. She incorporated subtle variations in rhythm that echoed the spirituals her grandmother had taught her, integrated jazz-inspired phrasing while maintaining Bach's harmonic foundation. The piece evolved into something both familiar and entirely new, respectful of classical tradition but unbound by its constraints. As she played, Zora felt completely present in the music. The auditorium, Laurent, Collins, all faded into background awareness. There was only the violin, her fingers, and the story she was telling through sound. When the final note faded, the silence was absolute. Zora stood perfectly still, violin lowered, waiting. That was. Collins began, then stopped. He cleared his throat. That was not Bach as written. No, sir, Zora agreed quietly. Miss Williams, Laurent's voice held a complexity Zora couldn't quite decipher. What you've done is either musical sacrilege or extraordinary innovation. I'm not entirely sure which. The Symphony Hall audience expects traditional interpretations, Collins stated, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. While your creative approach has merit in certain contexts, our showcase demands classical orthodoxy. With respect, Director Collins, Laurent surprised Zora by saying, our audience also complains about program predictability. Miss Williams' interpretation, while unconventional, demonstrates both technical mastery and genuine artistic vision. Zora stood silently, sensing the tension between the two men. Victor, Collins said with strained patience, we've already identified Miss Pierce as our primary student performer. Adding someone with such an unorthodox approach would create a program imbalance. On the contrary, Laurent countered, it would create precisely the kind of artistic contrast that elevates a performance from merely competent to memorable. Collins sighed audibly. Let's discuss this privately. Miss Williams, thank you for your audition. We'll inform all participants of our decision tomorrow. Ms. Johnson appeared at Zora's side, gently touching her elbow to guide her from the stage. As they reached the door, Laurent called after them. Miss Williams. Zora paused, turning slightly. Bach once said, the aim and final end of all music should be none other than the glory of God and the refreshment of the soul. I believe you would have found your interpretation refreshing. Coming from Laurent, it was perhaps the highest praise possible. Zora nodded once in acknowledgement before leaving. Outside, Marcus was waiting anxiously. How did it go? I played, Zora said simply. And now we wait. As they left the school, neither noticed the man standing quietly at the back of the hallway, Raymond Scott, music columnist for the City Tribune, who had come to write a standard piece about Laurent's master class but had instead witnessed something unexpectedly compelling. The week before the Symphony Hall showcase unfolded in a whirlwind of preparation and tension. When the selection announcement came, Eliza Pierce and Zora Williams would both perform, with a third student as alternate. The reactions were swift and varied. Eliza's supporters whispered that Zora's inclusion was merely tokenism. Zora's fellow students from the school's jazz ensemble celebrated it as long overdue recognition. For Zora herself, the announcement brought not just excitement but daunting responsibility. Director Collins had agreed to her performance only on the condition that Laurent personally supervise her preparation, ensuring the piece remained accessible to traditional audiences. Which was why, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, Zora found herself in a private rehearsal room at Symphony Hall itself, working directly with the maestro for the first time. Again, Laurent instructed after she completed a run-through. The transition from Bach's original structure to your improvisation needs to be smoother. The audience should experience it as evolution, not disruption. Zora nodded, repositioning her violin. The past days had revealed a different side of Laurent, still demanding and exacting, but with a genuine respect for her musical instincts that had been absent in their early encounters. Before we continue, Laurent said, his chair creaking as he leaned forward, I want to understand something. Why this piece? Why Bach's Chaconne specifically? Zora lowered her violin slightly. Because it's the piece you used to humiliate me that first day. The bluntness of her answer hung in the air between them. I see, Laurent finally responded, his voice carefully neutral. Revenge, then. Reclamation, Zora corrected. You took something beautiful and used it as a weapon. I wanted to take it back and make it mine again. Laurent was silent for a long moment. Your grandmother would approve of that answer. You knew her, Zora said. It wasn't a question. We met once, at a symposium on improvisational techniques in classical performance. I was not receptive to her ideas at the time. Lauren's voice carried a hint of regret. She argued that classical music had become fossilized by tradition, preserved but no longer living and evolving. That sounds like Grandma Jo. She was right, in ways I wasn't prepared to acknowledge then. The sound of Laurent standing, pacing slowly across the room. The classical tradition survives because each generation reinterprets it through their own experience while respecting its foundations. Your adaptation of the chaconne, it does that. The admission clearly cost him something. Zora nodded in acknowledgement, sensing that further comment would break the fragile moment of understanding between them. Let's continue, Laurent said, his tone returning to its professional precision. From the Allegro section. Later that evening, Marcus picked Zora up from Symphony Hall, finding her exhausted but oddly energized. Laurent actually helped, she admitted as they walked to the subway. He suggested modifications that make the piece stronger without compromising my vision for it. I'm still not sure I trust him, Marcus replied skeptically. I don't need to trust him, Zora said. I just need him to trust my music. At home, Zora found a message waiting from Dr. Chen, who had heard about her selection for the showcase. I'll be there, Dr. Chen promised in her voicemail. Front row. And Zora? Remember what we discussed, play for yourself first. The audience will follow. The next day brought unexpected complications. Director Collins requested a meeting with Laurent and both student performers to discuss program details. The meeting, held in Collins' elegant office overlooking the concert hall, quickly revealed the director's continuing reservations. The program will flow as follows, Collins explained, pages rustling as he distributed printed schedules. Miss Pierce will open with Sarasate, followed by Miss Williams with her interpretation of Bach. Then Maestro Laurent will conclude with Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Director, Laurent interjected, studying the schedule, you've allocated only 4 minutes for Zora's piece. The chaconne, even in its traditional form, requires at least 10. We're on a tight schedule, Collins replied smoothly. The donor's reception afterward. My piece needs 8 minutes minimum, Zora spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. Collins made a sound of impatience. Miss Williams, programming decisions are not. Alexander, Laurent cut in, using the director's first name pointedly, either the piece is performed properly or not at all. I've worked with Miss Williams to ensure her adaptation maintains the integrity of Bach's composition while offering a fresh perspective. It requires 8 minutes, minimum. A tense silence followed. Zora could practically feel Collins' frustration radiating across the desk. Fine, he finally conceded. 8 minutes. But not a second more. As they left the meeting, Eliza fell into step beside Zora. He doesn't want you there, she said, her voice low and cutting. None of them do. You're a diversity checkbox, nothing more. Zora kept walking, her face expressionless. See you at the performance, Eliza. The days blurred together as final preparations intensified. Raymond Scott, the music columnist who had witnessed Zora's audition, published a small preview piece mentioning the intriguing inclusion of a visually impaired student violinist offering an unconventional Bach interpretation. The article attracted attention from several local music blogs, creating unexpected buzz around what had been considered a routine showcase. The night before the performance, Zora sat on the edge of her bed, violin in her lap, fingers tracing the worn wood with its familiar imperfections. I wish you could be there, Grandma Jo, she whispered into the darkness. I'm playing for you. From the doorway, Marcus watched silently, his heart full of pride and anxiety for his sister. Tomorrow, she would either triumph or face public humiliation on the most significant stage of her young life. Either way, he knew she would face it with the quiet dignity that had carried her through every challenge life had placed before her. Get some sleep, Zoe, he said softly. Tomorrow's your day. Symphony Hall gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, its ornate architecture a testament to classical traditions and enduring elegance. Backstage, the atmosphere crackled with pre-performance tension. Eliza Pierce paced in her designer gown, periodically checking her reflection in a compact mirror. Zora sat quietly in a corner, fingers moving silently through the passages of her piece, her mind focused inward. Marcus adjusted the simple but elegant black dress they had purchased specially for the occasion. "You look beautiful, Zoe." "Doesn't matter how I look," Zora replied with a small smile. "Only how I sound." "Ms. Williams." Lauren's voice approached from the hallway. "A moment, please." Marcus squeezed Zora's shoulder before stepping away. Lauren's footsteps stopped before her. "The hall is full," he said without preamble. "Director Collins has seated several influential patrons in the front rows. People who could potentially support your future education." Zora nodded, understanding the unspoken message. A lot was riding on this performance. "Play the piece as we rehearsed," Lauren continued. "No last-minute improvisations." "Yes, sir." Lauren hesitated, then added more quietly, "Your grandmother believed music should speak truth, not just display technique. Tonight, your truth will be heard." He walked away before Zora could respond, leaving her momentarily speechless at this unexpected acknowledgement. The audience's murmurs filtered through the curtain, growing louder as the house lights dimmed. Director Collins gave a brief welcome speech, emphasizing the symphony's commitment to nurturing young talent while subtly managing expectations about the student portion of the evening. Eliza performed first. Even backstage, Zora could tell her playing was technically flawless, each note precisely placed, each dynamic shift executed with polished precision. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause when she finished. "And now," Director Collins announced, his voice carrying a hint of professional detachment, "we have Zora Williams performing her own interpretation of Bach's Chaconne from Partita No. 2. Ms. Johnson appeared at Zora's side, gently guiding her toward the stage. "Remember," she whispered, "you've already won by getting here. Everything else is just music." The walk to center stage felt endless. Zora could sense the audience's curiosity, the subtle shift in energy that always accompanied her appearance in public spaces. As she took her position, violin raised, Lauren's voice carried from the front row, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Let's see if charity cases belong on this stage." A shocked murmur rippled through the front rows. Zora froze momentarily, the cruel words slicing through her concentration. Then, something within her hardened into resolve. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her violin, and began to play. The first notes of Bach's Chaconne emerged pure and traditional, a deliberate choice to establish her technical credentials before taking the audience somewhere new. She played with precision and depth, her fingers finding each note with perfect intonation, her bow creating the rich tones the piece demanded. Then, gradually, Zora began her transformation of the piece. The rhythm shifted subtly, incorporating the soulful cadence of her grandmother's spirituals. The harmonic structure remained Bach's foundation, but the melodic expression became something more personal, more immediate, a conversation between centuries and traditions. The audience, initially skeptical, grew completely silent. Even the usual shifting and coughing ceased as Zora's music filled the hall. She played with her entire body, swaying slightly as the music flowed through her face reflecting every emotional nuance of the piece. In the front row, Laurent sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Beside him, Director Collins leaned forward imperceptibly, his initial skepticism giving way to reluctant fascination. As Zora approached the final passage, she departed most dramatically from Bach's original. Her bow flew across the strings with passionate intensity, the melody soaring with jazz-inflected phrases that somehow, miraculously, still honored the spiritual core of Bach's composition. It was technically brilliant and emotionally raw, music that demanded to be heard. The final note lingered in the perfect acoustics of Symphony Hall, suspended in time for a breathless moment. Then silence. Complete, absolute silence. Zora stood motionless, bow lowered, waiting in the crushing quiet. Had she miscalculated? Had her bold interpretation alienated this traditional audience? The second stretched painfully. And then it came, a single person rising to their feet, applauding with slow, deliberate claps. From the sound, Zora recognized Dr. Chen. Another person stood, then another. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause, cheers breaking protocol in this formal venue. "Brava!" someone shouted from the balcony. The ovation continued, growing rather than diminishing. Zora stood in its center, a small smile finally breaking through her composed expression. She bowed deeply, honoring the audience's response. As she made her way off stage, guided by Ms. Johnson's gentle hand at her elbow, Zora passed Director Collins, who had risen from his seat. "Miss Williams," he said, his voice carrying genuine humility, "I believe I owe you an apology. And perhaps a longer conversation about future performances." Backstage, Marcus enveloped her in a tight hug. "Grandma Jo was there," he whispered. "I felt her." "So did I," Zora replied, her voice thick with emotion. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Laurent performed his Vivaldi with his usual technical brilliance, receiving enthusiastic applause. But in the lobby afterward, it was Zora whom audience members sought out, to shake her hand, to express their admiration, to ask about her unique interpretation. Raymond Scott, the music columnist, waited patiently for his turn to speak with her. "Miss Williams," he said when finally introduced, "your performance will be the lead in my column tomorrow. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about your musical approach?" Before Zora could respond, a familiar voice interrupted, Laurent, his accent more pronounced with emotion. "Miss Williams," he said formally, "a moment of your time, if I may." Raymond stepped aside, promising to catch up with Zora later. Laurent guided her to a quiet corner of the busy lobby. "You ignored my instruction about last-minute improvisations," he said, his tone unreadable. "Yes," Zora admitted. "After what you said, about charity cases, I decided to play my truth, not your version of it." Laurent was silent for a moment. "I never said those words. But I heard, not my voice, Miss Williams. I suspect Miss Pierce, seated beside me, took advantage of your inability to distinguish speakers." Zora absorbed this information slowly. "So you didn't. I would never say such a thing. Especially not after working with you these past weeks." Laurent's voice softened slightly. "Your performance tonight was extraordinary. Not because of your blindness or your youth, but because you found something new to say in music that has been played for centuries." "Thank you," Zora said simply. "Your grandmother would have been proud. As would Bach himself, I suspect." Laurent cleared his throat. "Director Collins has already mentioned the possibility of featuring you in the Young Artist series next season." As Laurent moved away to speak with other patrons, Eliza approached, her perfect composure slightly fractured. "Congratulations," she said stiffly. "I didn't expect that response." Zora smiled gently. "Thank you, Eliza. Your Sarasate was technically flawless." "But not memorable," Eliza replied, surprising Zora with her honesty. "Not like yours." She paused. "How did you do it? Play like that?" "I stopped trying to be what others expected," Zora answered simply. "And started being who I am." Later that night, as Marcus drove them home, Zora sat quietly with her violin case in her lap, fingers tracing the worn wood of her grandmother's instrument. "You changed things tonight, Zoe," Marcus said softly. "Not just for yourself." "Maybe," Zora replied. "But mostly, I just played my music. Sometimes that's enough to change the world, one note at a time." Behind them, Symphony Hall's lights dimmed as the evening concluded. But for Zora Williams, a new movement was just beginning. Dear friend, this story reminds us that disability is not inability. Too often, we judge people based on what we perceive as limitations rather than recognizing their unique potential. Zora's journey shows us that true music, like true talent, transcends physical barriers and speaks directly to the soul. When we exclude people based on disabilities, we don't just harm them, we deprive ourselves of extraordinary gifts and perspectives. Let's build a world where everyone has the chance to share their unique voice. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe to support more content that celebrates human resilience and challenges us to look beyond our prejudices. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful music comes from those we least expect to hear.